Pesto is one of my favorite foods. Soon enough I'll be neck deep in it after being able to grow basil and all these other herbs in this indoor garden that I finally built. I've been wanting to do this for a while now. Let me show you how I did it. To start this build, we are going to build out the frame. This is going to be built primarily out of 2x3s, but the center planter box here is going to be built out of 2x6s. The dimensions of these 2x6s are 77 inches for the long pieces and 23 inches for the sides and the middle pieces. The reason I'm using 2x6s for this box is this is where the plants are going to sit in. So I wanted that extra depth. Next we're going to do the shelf. So this is going to have the same dimensions as the planter shelf of 77 inches long for the front and back pieces and the sides, and the supports here are going to be 23 inches long. So once we have this assembled, we're going to do the very last box, which is where the light is going to hang from. Now this is going to be a little bit narrower than the rest of them, so the front and back is going to be 77 inches, but the center supports and the sides are going to be only 18 inches. Since the light is going to hang from the center, I really don't need that full depth. We're going to move on to assembling everything. So starting off with the planter box, that's 2x6s, we're going to screw in the legs, which are 35 inches tall. I'm going to flip this over and install the back legs, which are 7 feet tall. Next, we're going to shimmy this shelf box into place here. Put it up on some 4-inch spacers to get it off the ground and get it temporarily screwed in. We're going to try to get it somewhat plumb. We'll put in one screw here to get it temporarily held in place. Once we get everything assembled, we'll go back and really secure it with multiple screws. I wanted to attach this to the wall, so I'm marking out the studs, making sure it's level, and driving in some 3-inch deck screws to secure it. We're going to install the top frame here where the light hangs down from, so we're going to attach it to the post as well as anchor it to the wall into the studs. Now this has quite a cantilever, so we are going to deal with that a little bit later, so just hold your horses. For the planter box, I'm adding one more 2x3 at each end, and this is where the plywood's going to sit on, so I just added that extra support. We're going to cut the plywood, and this is why I made the depth 23 inches, so we could use one sheet of plywood and be able to use it for both the planter shelf as well as the shelf below. Cut it to size and add in these notches at each corner to offset your cut for the 2x3 posts. Got a nice tight fit with the plywood, and we're just going to brad nail this down. You can screw it if you want to, I just don't see the need for it. I added in these 2x3s at each corner post, and this is just going to help make things flush, so when we install the trim it'll be a lot easier and a lot smoother. Next we're going to cut out the plywood for this bottom shelf here using the remaining piece of plywood that we have. We're going to clean this up a little bit with all the sawdust down there before we install the bottom shelf. Put that into place and secure that down with some more brad nails. I'm going to do a little bit of waterproofing here since this is a planter box. It'll be exposed to water, so I want to be able to protect it a little bit. I'm going to seal up the edges with some silicone as well as seal up the pores with some primer. I don't like the look of extension cords being visible, so I'm going to route one behind the post here, and I'm just taking these screws out and putting them in at a different angle to make sure my 1/2-inch spade bit doesn't hit those and ruin my bit. So with this 2x6 I had to add an extension on top to get all the way through there. I had this old extension cord that met its demise from a hedge trimmer, but that's alright because we're going to cut that bad part off and we're going to route it through the 1/2-inch holes that we made behind the post. And this actually worked out well because then I only had to cut a 1/2-inch hole to fit the cord through instead of a gigantic hole to fit the plug. You can find these replacement plugs at any big box store, and you just strip it and feed those into the terminal and tighten everything up. Make sure those connections are nice and tight. And we're just going to test this with an electrical tester here, and everything looks good. Here I'm making some frames for the doors. So we're going to have 2 doors in the center for the shelf below. So I just found some scrap wood, 1.5 by 1.5, cut it to length of the doors that I wanted, added in this brace to make sure the doors don't sag, and made one for the left and for the right. Use some screws to back it up and strengthen up the frame. Moving on to the trim, I decided to use these 6-foot cedar fence pickets because they're cheap and because cedar is a natural bug repellent. So we're going to start by doing the corners first, and these are going to go all the way down to the ground. These are the full 5.5 inches wide. Next we're going to move on to the middle pickets. So I cut these to length, and I had to do a little bit of math to get the right width because I wanted all of these pickets to be the same width. So I measured between the inside of the corner posts, divided by 14 pickets to get the right width, and ripped those down on the table saw. I started in the middle and moved my way outward to make sure I had a nice split right at the middle for the doors. Once I got to the spot of where the door was going to be, I tacked the door frame into the cedar pickets and did this on both sides. Before I got to the next picket, I added in these 2x3s and screwed these in. And this is just going to be for the other side of the hinge to anchor down into. It's going to give it a little bit more support than rather than just screwing it straight into the cedar planks. At the end of the video, I'll cut out the doors using a circular saw. The reason I did this is I wanted all the wood grain to line up really nicely and then be able to cut the doors afterwards. So we'll get to the door cutting later on. Using a flush trim router bit, I cleaned up the tops and bottoms of these pickets to make sure they were flush with the frame. I'm going to sand everything down here. This was stupid. I should have done this in the garage. I adapted after this and sanded everything in the garage before I installed it. We're going to deal with this cantilever on this top frame here. I could have used some brackets of some sort, but I went another route. So using some eye bolts screwed into the stud, as well as some heavy duty picture frame wire and a turnbuckle, give this top frame an extra support, and as weight is added to it with the trim as well as the light, I can tighten these up and make sure everything is nice and level. Quick note here, I added in a 2x3 block right where my hands are, and that's just so I can screw in an eye bolt for the light to hang from. I decided I was going to be a little bit extra here and add some cedar pickets to the back wall to make this thing look like a whole unit. I marked out the studs and using some 2-inch brad nails anchored all these pickets to the wall. So after that, I'm going to trim out the underside of this top box. I'm going to notch out those posts and go back and forth and anchor in all of these cedar pickets. For the front part, I overlaid it just slightly so I could trim this nice and flush to the front edge of the frame. I cut a contractor bag in half and use this as a liner. So I'm just stapling this all the way around the edges and trimming off the excess here. I'm going to add some trim here to cover up these pine 2x3 posts. I'm going to trim out the inside of the frame here just to cover the seam of the black liner. Trimming out the top here and have mitered corners just to give it a nice seamless look. Finally getting to cutting out the doors here, so I'm going to mark this out. It's going to be 1.5 inches away from the cut, since normally on a circular saw you're about 1.5 inches away from the shoe to the blade. I'm going to use a straight edge as a guide and cut this out pretty much all the way. We'll use a multi-tool to finish off that cut. And I'm just going to attach the hinges here as I go. We'll do the same thing for the top cut. Adding some door pulls for each one of the doors, as well as sand off the edges, and go back with a brad nailer and anchor each one of those planks to the door frame. I made a template here to give it a little bit of curvature to the top trim. I'm going to use that for both sides to mimic the same shape. Adding these last two pieces of trim, and this thing will be fully trimmed out. Moving on, I'm drilling some pilot holes for the eye bolts for where the light is going to hang from. Drilling out a 2-inch hole here to route the light cord through the top and plug into the extension cord that we routed up there. So I drilled a 2-inch hole for this 2-inch furniture grommet, and I'm going to epoxy it in there. It's probably a little bit overkill. You could just use some glue, but it works. So now it's time to install the light finally. I'm going to string that up to the eye bolts, feed that through, and give it a test. On to the fun part here. I'm going to mix up some soil, have some fertilizer to get those roots started. After doing a little bit of research, breaking up that root system at the bottom seems like a good practice to have the roots actually grow into the pot. You can see me kind of breaking this up right here. So finally we get to actually bring these plants in. We got a tomato plant, we got mint, we got oregano, basil, a jalapeno plant, cilantro, and a romaine lettuce plant. I wanted to cover up that black liner, so I bought 3 packs of decorative rock to bring that in. Be careful when placing those in so you don't rip the liner, but this just added a nice little touch. Give it its first watering, and soon enough we will be swimming in pesto. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and a subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. I hope this gives you a little bit of inspiration to build your own indoor garden. Soon enough you'll be drowning in pesto as well. Thanks for watching.